What's up, everybody? Here we are, YouTube Live. Welcome, everyone. What is it? It's 12 p.m. here on Monday, August 26th in Pacific Standard Time. So wherever you guys are watching this, whether you're watching it live on the replay, I would love to hear from you guys in the chat section. Where are you guys coming in from? Where in the world are you guys looking at my face from? Please let me know in the comment section, you guys. I would love to know where we're coming in from. Okay, so today, you guys, we're going to be talking about healing the inner love addict. We're going to be talking about love addiction, all those sorts of crazy, big fucking things. So just if you guys have any questions, it doesn't have to be about this topic, just any questions in general, feel free to include them in the chat section on the side. I would love to kind of riff and jam off whatever you guys are working through, whatever you guys are thinking. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to post those in the chat section. Again, guys, if you're watching this live, I would love to hear where you guys are coming in from in the world. I would love to know who I'm speaking to, who I'm talking to, because again, I'm wanting to have these be more of a discussion eventually. Obviously, right now it's a little bit like kind of like a monologue for me, but I'm hoping that these is going to be more of a discussion, just more of like a Q&A where I can build community with you guys, where I can kind of interact with you guys, where we can connect in a different place. So that's eventually where I'm wanting to. My ex showed up after 9 months of no contact, and I wonder what was the reason. Okay, well, we will get into that, Ursula, the evil sea witch, because obviously there's a lot of things. Like, why do they try to get our energy again? Okay, great question. So I'll get into it here as we kind of roll, you guys. So love addiction, healing the inner love addict. That's a big one, right? And so the first thing I think I want to say with this is that, and this is just my, because I know there's people who are like in recovery for things like sex and love addiction. And, that's not really what I'm going to be talking about here, because I really feel that basically all human beings, on some sense of the spectrum, have the capacity to show up kind of with this love addiction, right? So I really see it as sort of a spectrum, right? It's really a spectrum. It's like with anything, right? Like I have this kind of whole theory that we're all sort of addicts in one way or another, but it's very much a spectrum. And if you think about like relationships and love, it's the most spiritually charged, the most emotionally charged thing in our entire life. It's a thing that we all want more than anything. It's something that we all crave so badly. We all want to be able to fall in love. We all want that sort of that happy ending story, right? So it's something that we all want and we all crave so much in our life. And so I really feel this idea of, healing the inner love addict, I very much sort of see it as a spectrum, right? I very much sort of see it as a spectrum because, for example, just for me and my own path, like I would never identify with being like a love addict, like I need to go to recovery, but I definitely have noticed kind of these love addict tendencies that have come up inside of me in the past, right? And so I very much sort of see it as a spectrum. So not everyone is like who identifies, quote unquote, sort of with being this love addict is in recovery. And there's very much a correlation between being a sex addict and being a love addict. Just a lot of people who are in recovery for sex addiction, it often a lot of times goes hand in hand with love addiction as well. But I'm not going to be talking about that piece today. So first off, just we see it as sort of a spectrum, right? We see it as a spectrum. And so, we think about when the addict is sort of like set off inside of us, it's very much sort of this desperation, right? It's very much sort of this desperation that we feel that we won't be able to survive or we won't be able to live without this thing, right? So something's fired up in our brain, in our entire body that we won't be able to live. We literally won't be able to survive without this thing, right? So we think of, we maybe experience sort of being alone for the first time in a long time, and we kind of begin to like feel the world all on our own. That experience when you don't have any sort of prospects and you're not talking to anyone and you're just really just feeling the world on your own. this is often where that really, really comes up with people who can quote with some spectrum of being a love addict, right? We're like, oh shit, like I'm really feeling the world all on my own. And it's kind of scary. It brings up terror. It brings up, everything from scarcity to I'm never going to be able to find anyone, that I'm going to be all alone, to this actual fear that we're not okay, right? This actual fear, this actual fucking terror in our body that we're not okay, right? And so just the experience of like, you get out of a relationship or you're moving through the world and you're just feeling your own energy completely, right? So much of it just comes from this idea of just not being able to sit with ourselves, right? If you think of, not always, but a lot of just addiction in general is sort of this deep, deep internalized sort of shame, right? This deep sort of internalized self-disgust. We find ourselves disgusting. We have this deep sort of shame, this sort of internalized sort of aggression that we have towards ourselves that basically we just really don't feel comfortable in our own skin. We've like, when we're completely in our own energy without any sort of, substance sort of peace, when we just feel our own energy completely like just kind of sober in the world, we're like, oh shit, like this is like, and just to point out, it's kind of like an asterisk. What I've seen is like people who get off substances, like let's say addicts that get off substances, the number one way the addiction or the addict tendency show up is in relationships and love addiction. And, that is somewhere that it shows up for so many people, because I just see people transferring addictions all the time. Maybe it's like you stop drinking or you stop fucking smoking weed or, all these things. And it seems like addiction and relationships is somewhere where so often like the addict like transfers the addiction is like, and because love is such something that we want, something that we desire, like we desire to be seen, to be heard, to get our needs met. And it comes from often a place where that wasn't the case, right? So the root of it really, really is this piece where we're disgusted with ourselves. We have this deep, deep internalized shame. We're not able to sit with ourselves, right? And so when we really actually just sit with ourselves, just completely on our own, we're like, ooh, like this is a lot, right? So much of like healing, let's say love addiction, is actually just really learning to feel the world on your own, just completely just in your own skin without sort of numbing agencies to, for example, in masculine work, they call this like a feminine detox. It's kind of like a dopamine detox too, right? Where you're not talking to anyone, you're not doing porn, you're not engaging in these dating sites, you're like, quote unquote, sober in terms of like a feminine detox is that you're not, you're just totally in your own energy. You know what I mean? You're not like dirty talking with anyone. You're not like talking with anyone with any sort of like romantic, flirtatious, sexual insinuation. It's just completely clean. Right. And so much of like, how do we begin to course correct this propensity to like love addiction? It's really about learning to feel your own energy in the world, right? Really being able to walk and feel your own energy in the world. This is why I like doing things like celibacy periods. I mean, I've done many celibacy periods, which are super, super useful to be able to just have periods of time where, you're not actively dating, right? Just like think about, so many people are just constantly dating. They're constantly like swiping on the apps and they don't even fucking know why they're doing it. They don't even know why they're doing it. It's kind of got this entertainment sort of value. And so much of it is being able to feel the world all on our own energy, right? Really, really being able to feel the world all on our own energy. And so if we think about, okay, we have this internalized sort of disgust, this sort of internalized shame, right? So like, if you're going to take like, and again, this isn't about talking really about addicts or addiction, but really like what it is with addicts or addiction is like, you're so uncomfortable in your own body. You're so uncomfortable in your own skin. And that's where it comes to propensity to addiction, is to flee. We're trying to escape the body, right? whether it's through escaping through some type of substance, whether it's like working all the time, whether it's being addicted to exercise, whether it's being addicted to dating, like just distraction, anything to take us away from the voice in our head, from our own sort of internal experience. We're doing anything we can to escape, right? So much the base of like love addiction really comes from a level of internalized disgust and shame and self-loathing, right? So that's like the root. And so like, what creates that, right? What creates that? Well, you have to go way back, right, into our childhood, into just experiences like even going into an experience of in the womb. Like, what was the experience when you were in the womb, right? For example, the earliest sort of connection, the attachment bonding that is creating with our mother, our own sort of how we view the universe and the safety that we see the universe at large is going to do with what was the emotional state of mom when she was pregnant with us, right? So, for example, I experienced a lot of different trauma and dysregulation when I was in the womb. That's kind of like one of the biggest core pieces for me, which manifested as an anxiety disorder when I was 8 years old. And it all came from the emotional state of what was happening in kind of the surroundings and the incubation when I was in the womb, right? So the earliest attachment bonding is happening when we're in the womb. And so if mom is really not attuned to us, if mom is really not emotionally regulated, if she's got a lot of fear, if she's got a lot of anxiety, if she had a lot of really challenging emotions that came up or stresses that came up or different sort of instabilities that were being experienced, then we're going to take all that on. So that's beginning to form, right? And it's forming the earliest bonds with intimacy, with connection, and ultimately just how we view the world at large. And so it starts in the womb. And then, so much of love addiction is going to do with the attachment bonding that we have with our primary caregivers, right? Where we were able to have our needs met consistently, that we were able to have the experience of being co-regulated by mom and dad, by our primary caregivers, where we just saw the world as a safe place, right? We saw that it wasn't just infused and full of threats, right? So you think about like, where is the earliest sort of creation of this? It's really going to be that likely we didn't get our needs met or our needs were inconsistently met, right? So that there was some sort of internalized that maybe there's something wrong with us, right? Maybe we're not worthy of love, right? Maybe we're not worthy of being chosen. So much of it is formed in relationship to the emotional attunement of the primary caregivers. So much of the earliest security, right? Because if we think about like love addiction, right? Like really what that is that we struggle with like secure attachment, that we struggle to be able to meet our own needs, to be able to live within that inside of ourselves. And so, we're addicted to things like emotional dysregulation, to nervous system dysregulation, to kind of push-pull situations that aren't healthy for us, situations that are toxic for us, situations where we don't get our needs met, where we're not seen, where we're not heard, right? You think about, so so much of like love addiction is that really, and this compulsion is that really when we were really young, we didn't get our needs met, or we weren't seen fully in such a way. And so we're drawn to situations that sort of exasperate sort of that attachment wiring that we experience when we're young. So much of it is this push pull, right? It's a situation where we're not able to hold what is actually good for us, right? So we continue to kind of like, muck and like move around in all these situations that are not good for us. Like we know at some level that this situation is not aligned, right? Like if you think about like even just the root of addiction, it's like doing something, actively engaging with something that you know is not good for you, but you do it anyway. So it's the same thing like relation with love addiction. You're engaging in a situation that this person can't see you. Like at a rational adult self, higher self level, this person can't see you. This person can't choose you. This person doesn't have the capacity to meet you. You know this, but you do it anyway, or you engage in some way. So at the core of it, it's really acting out of integrity because there's a desperate, hurt little boy or little girl inside that ultimately what that little boy or little girl is looking for is approval and validation. That little boy, little girl is looking just to be seen, to be heard. Like, can you see me? Like, can someone fully see me in my full inherent capacity, and someone choose me? And we had experiences where that wasn't the case, right? The complete opposite. Maybe we had a dad that left. Maybe we had abusive parents. Maybe we had parents who were totally emotionally disconnected, right? So like all of it really stems from when we were really young, and particularly in those pre-verbal years, not getting our needs met, right? Because when you think about like love addiction brings up this desperation. There's something desperate inside of us, which we're desperately searching for, like a deliverance and a salvation from our own internal suffering, from our own internalized shame, from our own internalized self-disgust. And we're looking for a relationship to basically kind of swoop in and save us from some aspect of ourselves, something that lives like deep core in the energetic, cellular, physical, emotional body that we haven't tended to, right? That we haven't been able to heal. And so there's this desperate part of us that really just what we want is approval and validation. So really, when we look at love addiction, it's an addiction to approval and validation, right? That we're trying to source something outside of ourselves in such an act of desperation because there's an internal void with being seen, heard, and chosen. It's actually like an internal wound with belonging, that we don't feel like we belong there's something inside of us where we don't feel like we belong. We never feel like we really have, right? And so what this is really doing is we use now relationships as sort of this fantasy escape. Like you think about love addiction, it's very we see relationships as this fantasy that can save us, as this place where this relationship will all of a sudden bring us to where we want to go. The place that we've never been able to cultivate sort of in our own sovereignty, in our own energy, that this relationship will bring us to that place, right? And we keep kind of going back, like this relationship to deliver us. And it's stemming from there's a deep aspects of our shadow and deep aspects of our own sort of wholeness and sovereignty that we haven't tended to, right? There's deep aspects of us becoming our own savior, to be able to walk the path and see ourselves in such a way that we can actually begin to meet our own needs. We can actually begin to become the source of our own sort of salvation and deliverance, right? So it's very much this externalized fantasy, putting love on a pedestal, right? So it's a very idealistic, love is this sort of place that's going to alleviate us from our suffering. Really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to save from having to feel that internalized self-disgust, the internalized shame. And actually, so what's underneath the disgust and the shame is so much deep hurt and pain from not ever having our needs met, or not having our needs met consistently. And these feelings of not feeling like we were attuned to, or we belonged at like a really core level, deep in our nervous system, right? So much of it just stems from a real dysregulated nervous system, right? That if you think about like love addiction, it's like this, right? It's very much like this roller coaster. It's very much like a push-pull. It's very much like unhealthy attachment, right? Very much like we're drawn to situations that aren't good for us. We're drawn to situations where we can't be chosen. So at the root of it is we're fighting to be seen, right? Love addiction, healing the inner love addict, having the love addict that arises within us. What it just means is we're fighting to be seen, right? We're fighting to be seen. And we have this imprint that it's actually really hard to be seen, that we have to prove our worth, that we have to fight upstream, that we have to go against the grain, that we just can't be seen right here, that somehow we're fundamentally flawed, that we're not enough just in who we are. Again, coming down to the root kind of addiction is this internalized self-loathing, this internalized shame, this internalized disgust, this real irritability and discomfort of just being in our own skin, of just hanging out in our own skin. without like basically hanging out in silence, without sort of any sort of distraction. And love addiction is and addiction to searching for a relationship to, be this sort of happy ending is like the most common way addiction gets transferred. Because we're all addicts, we're all addicted, we all have something that we use to really distract ourselves that's probably not healthy, right? But it's a spectrum, right? Some of us are fucking, doing fucking heroin and in a gutter, and some of us just, probably should, maybe overeat a little bit. Like we all have something, right? It's just a spectrum. And so at the root of it is like the desperate little boy, little girl is fighting to be seen. And so much of healing the inner love addict is really, really experiencing an attachment rupture relationally that actually just replicates what we experienced when we were in those pre-verbal years, which actually now begins to move the energy through our body, the terror, the fear, the pain, the hurt. There's something that's prompted sort of relationally, some sort of entangling that really, really moves that terror through our body. And so what's happening is we're now re-experiencing sort of this attachment rupture from when we were really, really young. And what this is doing, again, it's bringing up all that material of the lack of safety, the internalized shame, the internalized sort of self-loathing that you can't be chosen, that you can't be seen, that you can't be heard, right? So when you experience that attachment rupture and all that sort of fear and terror is brought up in the body, now you're having to begin to sort of work through some of these sort of earliest remnants and these earliest experiences of where that desperation is coming from, right? Because we think about it, like at the very high end of the spectrum, we're like, fuck, if I'm not with this person or this doesn't happen, that I'll die, that I'll never find anyone. I'm going to be all alone, that I'm literally going to die. At like the very extreme end of the spectrum, that's what's going on, because there's something in our system that is losing something, right? So we have this experience where if it doesn't work out with this person that I'm with, that I'm literally going to die. What that means is that the like little boy or little girl is fighting against this possibility that if this doesn't work out, they're going to re-experience the break in connection from when they were really, really young. This is why I always teach that attachment ruptures, whether familial, relational, and often relationships, relationship attachment ruptures are really important to open us up to the divine. Because when you experience this attachment rupture, what's really being revealed are the ways that you use love addiction and that the inner love addict is prompted inside of you, right? As you experience this rupture, you're re-experiencing that first break in connection, right? And so this is why when we go through relationships, when we go through heartbreak, we really often are re-experiencing the attachment rupture from when we were really young. This is so often why people who shouldn't be together stay together, because they're like the idea of like pulling that cord, or we're in situations that we know aren't good for us because the idea of pulling that cord is so overwhelming and fear driving to the system that we literally think we'll die if we don't have this person, right? And so what we're basically experiencing is our system is being anchored or co-regulated in some way by this person or this relationship, right? And we feel if we lose this, we're going to lose that earliest form of connection, that break in connection that we experienced, right? And so it comes from actually, we didn't experience really healthy emotional co-regulation, emotional attunement from our primary caregivers when we're growing up. That's why we're in this situation that we know, and think about how many people experience this. Like, this is not, so many people experience this where they're just in a relationship because it's stable, because it's secure, it's comfortable, it's good enough. And what it's really telling us is if that we were to disentangle, that our system wouldn't be able to hold it, right? This is why, again, attachment ruptures become such big catalysts for bringing us to God and the divine. And so when you experience that rupture in a relationship, this is so much about, you take stock of like, okay, what aspects of my shadow do I need to look at? What ways am I still really codependent, right? Love addiction, you guys, is basically just codependency. That's basically just what it is. It's love addiction is basically not taking stock and not becoming your own source of healing for all the ways that you're really, really codependent relationally, the ways that you really search from the wounded boy, the wounded girl. So when that attachment rupture happens, you're kind of sitting in the abyss and you're like, okay, what aspects of my shadow do I need to move towards? And what happens is this real state of taking total sober accountability, right? Total sober accountability of I'm externalizing and outsourcing these aspects of my healing pathway. Of course, relationships are going to be a place to heal, but when a relationship doesn't work, right, we're now taking stock of like, what aspects of my shadow, what ways am I looking for a relationship to save me, to alleviate me from this fantasy, right? And with love addiction, we keep going back. We keep going back, right? We keep going back to situations without having really moved into this deep internal healing of these deep wounds within us, right? We're like, maybe I don't have to heal this. Maybe this relationship can just work out. It can just be fucking amazing. And I don't really have to deal with this. And so most people never really have their inner love addict revealed because they just find a situation that works and they never really have to experience these deep sort of ruptures. They never actually go through them. So it's actually never brought to the surface. So it basically kind of stays dormant. But so when this is really provoked in the body, what it's doing is it's showing us, okay, we need to like tend to this. We need to sort of heal this. And so we keep going back to situations where like maybe we keep being drawn back into these situations that we know we're not going to get our needs met. And so it's very much this addiction, this desperation to situations where we know we're not going to get our needs met. Again, it's some replication, some experience of something that we experience when we're really, really young that we're drawn to, And so a real sort of simple question that we can ask ourselves is, and this is a very basic sort of like cliche thing to say, but like if we were to walk the path of our hero or our heroine, right? If we were to walk that pathway, what would that look like right now? If we were to become completely sovereign in our own energy, if we were to become completely whole on our own, what would that look like? Like, what would we have to learn to sit with? What would we have to bring into our space? For example, like, it might even be, say you're like a woman and you're like looking for a man to save you. Maybe you haven't really, move to a sovereign place where you've developed enough of your own internal masculine. And so you're kind of in this place where like a man will just come in and take all that role without kind of addressing, well, I'm not in my healthy masculine that can get shit done, that can like, be financially stable, that can make their own living and be their own person in the world. And we don't actually harvest and cultivate that aspect of ourselves. And we outsource that to a man. Right. So now it's okay, looking at like, what do I really, really need to tend to in myself? What do I need to do to become totally, totally sovereign and whole? Right. And so much of, okay, how do we move into learning to meet our own needs is that we really have to move into a sense of wholeness with ourselves. It's really looking at, in what ways are we the most codependent, right? In what ways do we desperately search for approval and validation from the opposite sex, right? So at the core of, again, love addiction is we're obsessed with approval and validation, right? Which means that we can't actually be seen, that we've never actually truly been seen. And so we're addicted to these little scraps, these little sort of pieces of approval and validation that kind of stroke the protective ego inside of us without really, really allowing kind of our own needs to be met. So, so much of that for women is healing your relationship to the masculine. So much of that for men is healing your relationship to the feminine, right? And a big part of this is leaking a lot of energy. If you want to talk about love addiction, so much of it is leaking energy all over the place, meaning you're leaking energy because there is some aspect of yourself that you're afraid or unable to totally regain the total sovereignty of your entire energetic container and energetic field, because again, that means you're gonna have to fully sit with yourself. You're gonna have to fully sit with that core peace in your body, that internalized disgust and shame, that feeling deep in your body that you are not good enough. Right. So think about it. We're leaking energy. It's kind of like we're casting all these sort of anchors. We're have our hands in all these different pots and all these different pies to kind of distract and deter us from our own connection. They're all hooks that we put into people, right? One way that women will do this is like leaking sexual energy of, you know, constantly looking for this approval and validation from men that they're attractive. Like, so really leaking energy. And so when we struggle with something like love addiction or being addicted to not being seen or addicted to situations that aren't healthy for us, so much of it is because the energy is really murky in the space. The energy is really murky in the space. So when you kind of tune into someone who's struggling sort of with something like love addiction, their energy is kind of scattered all over the place. They haven't like regained this sovereignty in themselves, right? They're kind of confusing, they're untrustworthy, they're leaking different energy, and they haven't regained it in their space, right? So much of like, how do we heal this? How do we actually move into a space of moving into our own sovereignty and wholeness is we have to take all our own energy back. We have to bring back into our own sort of internal container, right? So what this would be for like at a psychology level is internal boundaries, right? Internal boundaries. So much of what we're talking about love addiction is that we constantly cross our own boundaries, meaning we're going towards the man that we know can't see us. We're moving towards the woman that we know can't meet us. It's overstepping our own internal boundaries, right? Because it might be that we feel we won't actually be chosen if we regain the full sovereignty of our energy and come back into our space. Someone won't actually meet me. I won't be enough. I'm going to have to sit with myself. I'm going to have to sit with the true sobering experience of what it feels like to sit in my body, right? And so this is why like addictions get transferred all the time. Maybe we stop that, but we bring it here. And this is why, people never really deal with like the root of addiction because it just gets transferred. We stop one thing and then we go to another thing. And love addiction is a place where it often gets transferred to because relationships is like the ultimate spiritual experience. That, oh my God, I'm seen by this person. The primary romantic relationship is the ultimate sort of salvation that we're looking for. So it's like the most common place. And so when we really take our energy back and we realize the way that we overstep our own internal boundaries, we realize the ways that we break our own integrity, our own sort of internal code of like knowing what's good for us. Ultimately, you guys, what it means is we break the relationship with God and spirit, right? Because God and spirit is constantly communicating something to us that, this is not a good situation for us. This is not a good situation, that you can't be seen here. And again, addiction is doing things that you know are not good for you, but you can't control it, right? Because there's such a desperate act to avoid something, a desperate sort of seeking from some distraction, from some sort of flee. It's like this like fight or flight response, this flight response in the system. I need to vacate. I need to leave to avoid kind of what will come in this space. We'll have to meet ourselves, right? And so it's looking at the ways you break integrity with God and source. This is why, too, when you experience that attachment rupture, now your whole system is trying to reorient to God. What that means is that the integrity of your body and system is trying to reorient to a certain level of energetic sovereignty within yourself where you really are listening to where you're being guided. You're not fighting against it. And you're moving in those directions that are really being guided by God, right? So much of it is breaking our own internal boundaries, right? And when we really struggle with internal boundaries, what it means is that our ego is desperately seeking approval and validation. So when we have this sort of inner love addict that gets spiked, it means that we break our own internal boundaries because our ego, our wounded boy, our little girl, is desperately seeking approval and validation. At the root of that is we weren't seen, we weren't heard, we didn't get our needs met. We have a self-loathing, a disgust to sit in our physical body, right? And so that's the approval validation, is the ways that we try to somehow get our needs met without really having to deal with the root of what's underneath and beginning to kind of turn over that stone to meet that aspect of ourself. And so we can heal this within ourselves. And so much of moving through this love addiction is our own internal boundaries and recognizing the way that our ego breaks our internal boundaries, right? Recognizing the ways that, oh, I can feel the energy of this, like I'm seeking something. I'm looking for something, right? Like my little boy is like really trying to pull something. And so the energy is no longer clean, right? The energy is you're hooked into something, too much of the ego, right? You're hooked into something and you're searching for something, right? Maybe, I just want to get this little hit, right? I want to get this little hit of something, right? It's kind of just like being addicted to like junk food or potato chip habits rather than like savory food, rather than like really nourishing things, right? We're really drawn to these pieces that are not satisfying for our soul. So it's recognizing the energy that we bring out, right? And so when we're constantly overstepping our own internal boundaries relationally, romantically, sexually, meaning I know what's good for me, and I know situations where someone can meet me, where someone has the capacity to meet me, but you constantly are overstepping your own internal boundaries and going towards situations that are not good for you. Again, it comes from the ego seeking approval and validation. So the energy is no longer clean, right? We want to be able to really move into a space where we can be energetically sovereign, and we have this healthy discernment of our own internal boundaries and external boundaries, right? So much of healing this inner love addict is about boundaries, discernment, and a healthy relationship to your anger. Think about it, right? If you're trying to heal this inner love addict that gets spiked up, what it means is you didn't have your needs met, and you're addicted to situations that further create the experience of not being met in your life, right? And you move towards it because it feels like death. If you don't somehow get this thing, that you will die, right? And so it spikes up the deepest possible parts of us. At the root of that, there's going to be a lot of anger for not feeling chosen, for not feeling seen. There's going to be a lot of resentment for being in the situations where you can't be met by someone, and you keep going back, but that feeling of not being seen, of being perpetually misunderstood, there's going to be a lot of anger. Underneath that anger is going to be a lot of pain. It's going to be a lot of grief, right? That you really weren't chosen. But creating a healthy relationship to that anger. And so, for example, allowing that anger to come, really allowing yourself to feel your anger. Like, that doesn't feel good. Like, this does not feel good. Like, this doesn't feel energetically clean. This doesn't feel like this person really actually sees me. This person does not feel like they can actually meet me, right? And so really tuning into that anger and be like, okay, how do I use this anger? And anger is going to want to move into, how do I be more discerning, right? So it's actually being very discerning is how you heal the inner love addict, to move into a space of really being connected to your anger, right? Really being like, that doesn't feel good. Ooh, something about that, like, that doesn't feel good. And allowing that to come to the surface. So we think about anger, it's about validating your reality, right? Whatever the experience to be true, right? And so what's going to happen is when you're in sort of these love addiction sort of situations, what it essentially means, you guys, is that the energy is going to be all ambiguous. It's going to be all over the place. It's not clear. The energetic container and field is not pure. It's not clean. Both people are leaking energy. Both people's egos are sort of spiked up. Both people don't know what they want. Both people are kind of avoiding themselves. Both people are acting out of integrity. And so it's going to be about validating the reality that you are experiencing. To be like, I know this to be the reality. And, even just feeling into this person's space, like this person is untrustworthy, or this person has done these things that are out of integrity, or I can't trust this person, and really, really validating the reality that you're experiencing. Right. So much of anger, of like really building a healthy relationship to anger, is validating your reality, right? Validating your reality to be, I know this to be true, right? That I'm experiencing this person this way, right? And you don't let that get fucked with. You don't let that get fucked with. In turn, what you're doing in validating your reality, because if people don't have a good relationship to anger, what it means at the root, you guys, is that we've never really felt like our reality has been validated. We've always felt like we've lived in some sort of invalidation of our reality, right? That's why we can't have a very healthy relationship to anger. And so in learning to validate, I'm experiencing everything around me this way, and relationally, it's I'm experiencing this relationship this way, and I'm experiencing this person that way. And when you really build a healthy relationship to anger, you don't let anyone fuck with that. You're like, no, like I have total trust in what my reality is. It doesn't mean that you can't, engage in curiosity about someone's experience, because it might mean that you're experiencing reality, that there's still things that are getting lost in translation, miscommunications, all this stuff. But you don't let anyone fuck with your reality. In turn, in that space, you're able to really sort of form a more protective container, right? Internal boundaries is how you break your own integrity and how your ego leaks energy. External boundaries is where you let unwanted energy in space that is breaking some sort of integral code within you of what feels good. And your anger is how you're going to know. Your anger is how you're going to know when either there's an invalidation of your reality that's happening, right? An invalidation of your reality that's happening, or someone has crossed a boundary, or you have crossed your own boundary, right? That's how you're going to know. And so you have this really strong container. And again, people who really struggle with love addiction, like I'd say really in the spectrum, their energy is going to be all over the place. Their energy is going to be very, very unsovereign, right? They're going to be very much like looking for this pedestal love relationship to save us, but we're not actually able to hold that relationship. We're actually terrified of something that actually is good for us, a situation where we can actually be seen, right? And so again, this is very basic sort of stuff, you guys, but it comes back to ourselves. What do we have to do to fully see ourselves? What do we have to do to become whole and sovereign in our own energetic container, right? And so much of healing from this idea of love addiction, or we're searching for relationships as a fantasy, is that we really have to really feel the world on our own for a while. We have to really know what it's like to sort of walk our path on our own sort of sovereign energy in relationship to God, and really build up this level of discernment over our container, right? Which is just all going to be about, how you build community. How do you relate with your family, right? How do you interchange with the universe and the world? So much of it is going to be, how do you instill your own internal boundaries? How do you protect your own external boundaries? How do you discern what situations are good for you, right? And so discernment is so big, right? Love addiction is basically like, a situation comes and we like commit immediately, There's like zero discernment. There's zero boundaries. Like, oh my God, like little boy, little girl is looking for sort of this fantasy escape that maybe I don't have to sit with my deepest material, right? Maybe I don't have to sit with my pain. And so there's a level of actually of killing all hope. I always say this to my Ravished program, the women of my Ravished program, that in order for true love to begin, that we have to kill all hope. You know, we have to really move into, and I know it's unsexy to say this, but more of a practical, realistic sort of pragmatic view of love. It doesn't mean that we can't have passion and chemistry, but when we actually become our own source of wholeness and sovereignty, then we actually move into a more realistic way of relating to ourselves and learning how to meet our own needs. And we're actually really able to be out there in sort of the dating and relational space and really be discerning. Is this situation good for me? Will this situation amplify me? Can this person see me? Not one day, someday, right? Can this person see me right now? You know, do the way that our personalities vibe and connect, like, do we work well together? Can we heal together? Will you really discern and ask yourselves these questions? And so, so much of like healing the inner love addict is actually regaining the sovereignty of the container, right? So when we struggle with love addiction, it means we have a really flimsy container. When I say container, it basically is like a field around us, right? That we protect, that we nourish, that we amplify, that we create. And so love addiction comes from we don't have a container, or we have a really flimsy container. And so to heal the propensity for love addiction, to move towards these situations ultimately of desperation, where we don't want to sit with ourselves, where we're drawn to situations where we can't be met, we can't have our needs, we can't be seen. We're drawn to situations that feel like this roller coaster, a push-pull. It's complete dysregulation for our nervous system. Then we have to be, what do we have to do to regain the sovereignty of my own energetic container, right? How do I bring it back? And again, external boundaries is out here, right? It's protecting of like what comes into your space, because there's so much lack of energetic boundaries, leaking sexual energy, leaking energy, hooking into people with this idea of love addiction. It's not clean. The container, it's not clean, right? Both people are overstepping in some way, which means there's some type of ego. There's an overstepping of ego. There's a severing. There's a severing of the self, right? We're not operating as a fully embodied, wholly embodied being. We're severed. We're compartmentalized. We're acting in resistance to ourself. We're acting in conflict to the self. We're acting out of integrity to the self, right? So protecting your external boundaries through your anger, through protecting your reality. And it's just, always, for example, when my anger comes up, it's often about really doubling down on what I know to be reality. And I know now, because I have a very healthy relationship to my anger now, that when it comes, that it's really communicating something to me. And again, it's either that I'm feeling my reality is being invalidated. Someone has externally, even just energetically, moved too much of my space, or I have broken my own internal boundary, meaning I'm acting out of integrity with myself. My ego is moving back into the realm of seeking validation and approval, because again, that's how it really shows up at the surface. The ego is seeking approval and validation. That's why we leak energy. That's why we don't feel energetically sovereign. That's why we let people into our space that we know are not good for us. That's why we move towards people where we know we can't be seen, the shiny objects, because the little boy, little girl is seeking approval and validation, because at the core, we never were seen, right? And so now, as we regain our sort of energetic container and we descend and drop into the self, we begin to see ourselves more truly and purely. Now we learn that we don't have to fight for love. that we don't have to fight to be seen, that when you see yourself so purely, truly, and wholly, you can feel so viscerally in your body when you're not seen by someone. So now for me, in my experience, because I've seen myself at such a deep level, I can feel so viscerally when I'm not seen. I can feel so, and I just can't do those situations. I just can't do those situations because it brings up this anger, right? That I'm like, that really doesn't feel good. It really doesn't feel good. And so that anger really, really lets me know. It really is this guiding force. This is why I always say anger, the energetics of anger is how we build, right? The energetics of anger, you guys, is how you build your container, right? So much of healing from, again, in quotations, love addiction or addiction to approval validation, or we're still being pulled into these codependent, unhealthy, dysregulating dynamics, is because a lack of validation of our reality and a lack of true, deep, integral connection to our anger in a really, really healthy way, that we break our container, right? We allow other people to break our container and we break our own container. And in turn, that creates further feelings of self-loathing and disgust, right? If you think about it, you guys, and I think this is really important to say, if we think about internalized self-loathing, disgust with ourselves, we can't kind of be in our own skin. So we think about that, right? I can't sit with myself, right? I can't sit with myself. To me, the next thing that comes is anger, right? Anger is kind of the next layer that comes, right? Anger maybe at the universe, the world, anger at just people not seeing you, people not getting you, anger at your parents, maybe not getting your needs met. But underneath that is going to be the root of it, the core root, the deep, deep pain, the grief, this the hurt, that, and the fear and the terror, right? The stuck survival trauma that you weren't seen, that it wasn't safe for you, that it wasn't safe for you to be attuned to, that, your primary caregivers couldn't co-regulate you, that you had to cry it out when you were a baby. And so it created this survival trauma and these holdings in your throat chakra and in your heart, your chest. It created this deep, deep fear inside of you that the world was not a safe place, right? And so as we think about disgust, self-loathing, and internal aggression, at the next piece is anger that's wanting to come up to be experienced. Then after that, the next layer is that deep hurt and pain and the trauma in the system and the fear and the terror. And so that comes up when you start to regain your own energetic container. But why we continue to leak energy is because there's something that we don't want to feel. And it's because we anticipate that feeling it will actually lead to death, right? When actually what it really is the liberation. We feel that if we were to really, really sit with what's there, if we, for example, weren't to break our own internal boundaries, if we were to be really internal boundary and be like, I know that situation is not good for me, I'm not going to move towards it. We think it's going to kill us. We anticipate the threat of doing that is going to fucking kill us. But it actually becomes the source of our greatest liberation in our life. And the place where we can actually heal the internal aggression, the internal self-disgust, and the internal shame. All of a sudden, being in our body, we really, really feel worthy. We really, really begin to feel whole. We really, really begin to feel enough. And then what happens is that we can actually vibrationally align with what it is that we seek in the world, with what it is that we want relationally. We're listening to God. We're like, I understand where you're guiding me. I'm not fighting against it. I'm living in total integrity of that. And you actually move into joy inside of yourself, right? You free yourself up. You're no longer fighting yourself. You're now moving into more of a magnetic, more of a radiant place, because you have moved towards that thing you thought was going to kill you, and it liberated you. And now the freedom is unbound in your body. And you've actually learned to become your own source of worthiness. And you just feel enough just in your body and skin. And now what this means is you really have started to create a sovereign container. And now as you move through the world, you're going to really be able to protect and build momentum in cultivating this container, right? And what's happened is the way the ego is trying to look for approval and validation, you looked at the pain underneath that, you looked at the pain of not being seen, right? And the way that came up was you started to move towards yourself and see yourself in ways that you had never been seen, which started to bring all of that up that was there, that was living underneath the ego. And so now what emerges is more of an ease, right? We no longer feel so disgusted in our own body. We no longer have so much internalized shame that we're a piece of shit, that we're awful, that we're never going to amount to anything. We start to really have more of this just deep, deep ease in who we are. And we don't need that approval. And I mean, we're human beings. There's going to be a ways that we still source approval and validation from the ego. It's going to happen. We're not going to be in this perfect, clean, energetic all the time, and that's fine. But you really start to clean up your energetic container and your energetic field. And you're like, ooh, I really realize the ways that I break my own internal boundaries with my ego, the way that my ego is sourcing something. And this is the way that we hook into someone, right? So much of like, love addiction is it's a desperate little boy or little girl that's hooking into people. It's hooking into people to try to be saved from something. And what this means is we put relationships on this fantasy, this really unhealthy fantasy where we see this really idealistic, perfect image of what love could be. What we're really trying to do is recreate the perfect image of mom and dad and the experience of bonding with mom and dad when we're young. But we have this idealized image that the ego is projected and put on this pedestal, but we're not in a space internally in the body where we can hold that experience, something that's really good for us, where we're actually seeing, we're like, ooh, like this, it brings up too much fear. We sabotage it. We run away from it. And we move towards a situation that, again, replicates the story that we're not enough, replicates the story that we can't be chosen. We move into another story that is ultimately actually going to distract us from the pain, right? So being with people that don't choose us, well, it continues to hurt us over and over. It's actually the way that we're avoiding the hurt. So by continually being kind of hurt is actually a way that we're avoiding the hurt, avoiding really actually dealing with what's underneath. And we have to learn this enough times until we get fed up and we're like, I'm not fucking doing this anymore, And you have to learn the lesson enough times to really fucking realize what your work is underneath. What am I avoiding? What am I not tending to in myself to be a totally sovereign, energetically whole being? Because if you think about sacred union, it's two totally sovereign, energetic whole beings in the radiance of God that find each other on the God timeline. And so we have to ask ourselves, what do I need to move towards myself? Outside of externalizing relationships as a fantasy pedestal to save me, to alleviate me from my suffering, what do I have to move towards internally within myself and shine a light on and take total accountability for that? Total sobering accountability that this is where I still struggle, that I have to move towards this, that I'm not going to bring someone else into my space until I'm walking this path and beginning to work with this. And this is where that heals. When you're kind of doing that thing in your life that you had never done before, right? You're beginning to take those action steps and showing up for yourself in ways that you never had before. And that's where you begin to feel seen. That's where you begin to build a really, really healthy relationship to your anger, right? That's where you really, really begin to create a healthy relationship to your anger. And that's where we heal the inner love addict. That's the process. And the reason, guys, why I wanted to talk about this is because, again, I'm not a love addict, like, let's go to recovery. It's a spectrum. But I have noticed through my own process some tendencies towards love addiction, right? And I've had to heal this within myself. It's not 100% healed, but I have made monumental steps in healing this part of me. And again, it's a process like anything. I'm not perfect with it, but I've made massive, massive strides. And this process of moving towards this within myself has been absolutely paramount in my process to coming to my power, in my process to moving towards the divine, in my process for moving karma through the body and preparing myself for ultimately one day, hopefully, a sacred union, right? A sacred relationship of the highest order, which is what we all want, right? And so moving towards this really is going to move you into your ultimate power, and it's going to um, liberate you into your higher self and allow you to feel like your hero or your heroine. And it's going to create a sense of ease in your own body and a sense of deep, deep feelings of worthiness, a deep, deep feeling of worthiness in your body where you feel just so enough. You feel just so enough. And you're really going to be discerning when you feel seen, when you feel heard, and when you don't, you're not going to put yourself in those situations. And again, it's continuing to strengthen that container, that energetic container, your external boundaries, your internal boundaries, being very fucking discerning, validating your reality, recognizing the ways that your ego oversteps your own internal boundaries to seek approval and validation, taking total accountability. When you do that, this whole piece begins to change. So that's it, I think, guys, for what I'm going to talk about here. Again, it's such a fucking complex, big, massive, big picture piece that takes a little while to distill and sort of break down. So we'll probably have to talk about this again, but I think that's a good start on kind of breaking down this topic, which I think a lot of people are going to resonate with. And again, like I said, everyone, in my opinion, has this propensity inside of them on some level of a spectrum. But again, it is a spectrum. And I say that just because love is something that we all want. And all of us, no matter how great of a home that we grow up in, there's going to be ways that we weren't seen. There's going to be ways that we weren't chosen, that we didn't get our needs met. And so that is going to be revealed relationally, right? And again, it's a spectrum. Some people are going to have to learn harder lessons, more karmic lessons, but it's such a relevant thing to everyone. So quickly, Ursula's questions. My ex showed up after 9 months of no contact, and I wonder what was the reason. Like, why did they get our energy again? Well, question here is, are you allowing them to get your energy again? Again, as I mentioned, this comes back down to and presuming just the way in which you're saying that this situation with your ex was not a healthy dynamic, not a healthy relationship. I'm just assuming that, Jace, based off just your question and the energy that I feel. And so the question is, why are they getting our energy again, and why are we allowing them to? Because it all comes down to our energetic container and field, right? So again, if someone's getting our energy again, you know what? Again, this comes back. Our ego is getting some type of benefit from it. If we're allowing someone to get our energy again, it means our ego is getting some type of benefit. So they're probably overstepping their own internal boundaries, seeking approval, validation from their own ego, and we're allowing it to happen because our ego is also getting something in return. So now the energy is not clean, right? This person's probably overstepping their own internal boundaries, and we're allowing this person to come through our own external boundaries. And so the situation is, if you know it's not a situation that's good for you, and you don't want this person to have any access to your energy, you have to really, really set a boundary. Really, really set a boundary through the execution and realization of your anger in a healthy way, that this doesn't feel good. I don't like this person, feels like they're hooking into me. It doesn't feel clean. I don't want any part of this. And so you completely call them on their shit and say, this is not going to happen. And if they don't abide by it and they continue to overstep, then you have to fucking just remove them from your field. And so again, it's a healthy execution of your anger, and recognizing, what is it that my ego is getting here through an exchange that doesn't feel clean. And again, accountability for, like that doesn't feel good, but I'm allowing it because there's some type of like unconscious benefit that some part of me, the wounded little girl in me feels like she's getting from allowing this to happen. So again, it comes back to the sovereignty and the enforcement of your own energetic container. All right, guys, that's it. Done chatting here. Again, guys, if you're able to like this video, to subscribe to my channel. I'm doing these lives every Monday and Friday, 12 p.m. Pacific. And write your questions, your comments, whether here on the chat or in the replay, and let me know what you guys resonated with in this video. And I'll see you guys all in the next one.